Just call the meeting to order. Good morning, everybody. Welcome elected members, staff, and obviously a large contingent from our community. Lovely to see you all this very fine morning. Nice to have no rain for once. A little bit of a positive sign, I think. So we'll just kick off as we normally do with our agenda, starting with apologies. I understand we have them from Hazel Barnes. Beyond that, could somebody move that for me? Mayor Jim, seconded by Liz. Also, all in favour say hi. Against? Carried. Moving on then to disclosure of a member's interests. Do we have any today?
Yes, just identifying plan change 19. I'll be a commissioner on that particular plan change.
Excellent, great, thank you for that. And Marcus as well, those are noted. I can't really bring him to, no. Okay, so those are noted, thank you very much. Moving on then to late items. I'm not aware of there being any. In that instance, we'll move on to the confirmation of the order of meeting, which I understand is as it appears. Lou's happy to move that for me. I'll second. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. Wonderful. So then we move on to our confirmation of our minutes. So they appear from our previous meeting on pages 8, and as we normally do, I'll cite the page numbers, and if you have an issue, stick your hand up and give us a holler and we'll address it. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Yep. I'll move.
Thank you, Roger. Roger's moving. You'll second. Oh, Graham will second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Now we also have some confirmation of public excluded minutes, which is actually no minutes there. It's just confirming the minutes from the other one from the previous meeting. So I'm happy to move that those are true and correct from the chair. Bruce will second. I'll put that one too. All those against? Carried. Wonderful. Moving on then to our first substantive item on our agenda this morning, which is the Waipa District Water Supply Bylaw 2022, which is obviously the hearing and deliberations on those submissions. Graham Pollard, good morning. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. This is the Water Supply Bylaw, which is as a quick reminder, is a review of the existing 2013 Water Supply Bylaw. We've now reached the next stage of the special consultative procedure, which is the hearing and deliberation of submissions. Consultation ran from the 13th of May to the 13th of June, and 3 submissions have been received. These are included in full and also summarised with staff comments and recommendations in Appendix 1 of my report. So that's page 19 of your agenda. One submitter, Mr. Kane Titchener, has asked to present his submission in person and has a PowerPoint presentation. Now, as per our usual practice, 5 minutes has been set aside for this submission presentation and any questions. And following this, the committee should have time remaining to consider all 3 submissions and consider any amendments arising from them. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. So councillors will be aware that we have recommendations appearing on page 15 and 16. As I understand it, we'll move them in separate portions. I think in the first instance, we'll move 3A and B, which is to receive Graham's report and also then to agree to hear the verbal submissions before we open up the floor for that submission. Mike is happy to move that. Lou will second that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Fantastic. So we move now into receiving the verbal submission from Mr. Titchener. Morning, Kane. I saw you there somewhere. Now, Kane, as you'll be aware, you'll have 5 minutes. I'm happy for you to use the whole 5 minutes for your presentation, and then we can have questions from elected members after that, if that suits, if that's your wish. I'm aware that you have a presentation, which I believe Jenny has, and through the powers of technology will appear at some point. I'm aware it's reasonably long, just mindful that you've got 5 minutes, after which time I think we'll ask elected members for the opportunity to speak to you. So what will happen is that a little bell will go at 4 minutes, just to give you some idea of where you're at, and then a bell at 5, and then that will open the floor for elected members.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Just like to acknowledge the support that's turned up today. Thank you very much. They haven't had their voices heard. So the bylaw today is, see if things work. Where do I need to point this? Next one, please.
Yeah. Do you want to pause it? We'll just start when he starts talking, okay? Yeah. Is it going? Not going to play ball. Okay, there we go. Now you got it. Excellent.
Right. Go back. Okay. All right. So point 2.1.a states that the water supply bill bylaw is to protect, promote, and maintain public health safety. When we add fluoridation chemicals to the water supply, this will not protect, promote, or maintain public health. Just like to acknowledge the Town and Community Board also put the submission in as well. At the 20th of August 2019 meeting, I said that this was going to be happening. Having an undemocratic situation would arise. It will result in mandatory fluoridation. And at the time I said that there was the new research and the Scotland Child Smile program was available as a targeted approach. This is what I said. If and when the bill becomes law, currently non-fluoridated areas will become fluoridated. This is exactly what's happened now. At the time, this is what was said at the meeting. Part of what was said, we should draw attention to these studies and ask them, the Ministry of Health, to justify why they wouldn't protect the IQ of those unborn children. That's Councillor St Pierre. Milcrest, Jim said, let's get someone in here who knows what they're talking about. Slightly derogatory comment about myself, but that's fine. Jim reneged on that agreement later on to have both sides of the argument heard. Councils made their decision by not acting. You state in this Facebook post that this is not a council decision, but the fact is you have had plenty of opportunity to have both sides of the argument and actually have a conversation about with this public who have been completely ignored. Currently, there are over 300 animal studies indicating fluoride's damage to the brain. As at the 2nd of August 2019, there were 52 of 60 human studies that showed a lowering of IQ. Now there's 76 of 85 human studies that show a lowering of IQ. That's an additional 24 studies in the last 3 years. You've seen this one. This is the Bache study from 2017, shows a lowering of IQ. 5 IQ point reduction at 1 milligram per litre. We'll be fluoridating at 0.7 to 1 milligram per litre. JAMA pediatric study, this is the one I presented to you in August 2019, 4.5 IQ point reduction in boys. It's the top journal in the world. Published in the American Medical Association's journal, Pediatrics, the 500 mother-child pairs, 300 in Bache. Editors have concluded that it was an extremely rigorous study. As I said, this study was done at 0.7 parts per million. In New Zealand, we go from 0.7 to 1 part per ppm, which is the average of 0.85 parts per million. The editor says, I would advise pregnant women to avoid fluoridated water. The effect is on par with lead. New study published 2 weeks ago. Iodine deficient pregnant mothers' offspring has a 9 IQ point reduction. If not deficient, the research showed a 5 IQ point reduction. Goodman 2022, got the link there. Professor Paul Connor has said the arguments about this study, the arguments now being voiced by fluoridation defenders that fluoride's benefits against tooth decay need to be balanced against its neurotoxicity ring hollow. Permanently damaged brains far out a saving of no more than about 1 cavity per child. The Supreme Court ruled there's no practical option but to ingest fluoride. Pregnant women cannot just avoid fluoridated water. So I'm requesting Waipa District Council to advise the Health New Zealand that Waipa District will not be fluoridating Cambridge or any other township in the Waipa due to the latest science on fluoride's effect on IQ. Waipa District Council has allowed this undemocratic situation to arise, resulting in mandatory fluoridation. As I've said, new research shows a 9 IQ point reduction if deficient in iodine. And if you're not deficient in iodine, there's a 5 IQ point reduction. And as I've said for probably 6 years now, there's better alternatives, the Scotland Child Smile program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kane. Just moving on then to our recommendation now to, actually, no, sorry, I'm losing my mind. Throw the floor open for questions from elected members. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Titchener in respect of his submission regarding the bylaw? Claire.
Thank you, Kane. I did want to ask you whether or not you've taken those concerns to the Ministry of Health and if you've had a response from them on those particular studies.
So not the Goodman study, because that was published 2 weeks ago, but this science is being subverted by the Ministry of Health. So it's really up to the community, the councils, to just put their foot down and say, we're not doing it.
So does that mean that you did ask them but they didn't respond?
They respond saying it's not a concern.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Does anybody else have a question or a comment for Mr. Titchener while he's with us? Andrew.
Following on from what Claire has asked, so when they come back and said it's not a concern, what accompanied that? Was there evidence? What did they back that statement up with?
Well, I would say they're backing it up with nothing. So that's why I suggested 3 years ago, and this is what Jim agreed to have both sides of the argument heard, and that we can get to the bottom of it. So unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Does that answer your question?
Well,
So did they provide any other information to support the contention? I think is what Councillor Brown's
they are
asking.
saying the research is not an issue. So my suggestion is you go back to them and say, here's the 76 studies. You ask the question and you see what response you get.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions? Marcus?
It's a bit confusing. You've brought us facts and everything, Kane, but I'm wondering, surely the Ministry of Health would have read these studies as well. And why are these Why are these concerns not being publicly announced everywhere? Why are we not hearing?
Excuse me, could I ask the public gallery to just show some respect to the speaker?
Well, that's a really good point. And I'd say that somebody news has told me that they're not going to get into the science on this issue. So I would say the media has got a hell of a lot to do with this. There's no questioning of the narrative. So it's a good point.
But if I had to trust experts in the room, I think Ashley Bloomfield would probably have a research background in your sense.
Order, please.
Well, as I've said, we need both sides of the argument. We've got world experts, Bruce Lanphier, who did the research on lead's neurotoxicity. We've got the mercury expert, Crunchine. We've got these people who can front up, but as I said, Jim didn't want to have both sides of the argument. So,
thank you. New Zealand-wide issue though, like shouldn't these experts like this is a New Zealand-wide discussion? It's not just Waipā.
Yeah, but the issue is it's being rolled out in Cambridge.
Yeah, I realise that, but I'm not an expert on public health, but I would trust the experts.
Which is why we need both sides of the argument. I agree with you. Yes, there's no trust with the Ministry of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Any other questions for Kane while he's with us? Jim, did you have some?
It's probably not so much a question, I suppose, but and I agree, Kane, I agree that both sides of the argument needs to be put, but it needs to be put where the technical experts have got the knowledge and the experience, I suppose, to determine which side to come down on. And that's the issue that has been all the way through, to argue your point of view up and down the country with 67 territorial authorities, and it looks like it is going to be mandatory. And I think there's about, I think it was 14 other councils were got the same letter that Waipa got. But the issues that, and I think it's been inferred by some of the other questions, need to be between your point of view and the ministry, not 67 different councils up and down the country. And that's always been the argument, because it's costly for ratepayers, not just Waipa, but other ratepayers as well, to have these debates. And it seems logical that the ministry, who is charged with public health issues like this, is the right person to be having this debate with, not the 67 councils. That's the only point that I've been making, is take this information and have it with the ministry, because they're the ones that are going to make the decision.
As I said at the time, the Ministry of Health is pro-fluoride. The BHPs are pro-fluoride. So this was always going to happen. We were always going to get fluoridation. That's the point, Jim. We can't have the debate. There's no voice. We've got no voice.
I think, Kane, that's the point. We're not going to have any more influence because we haven't got the technical expertise within council. We're going to have no more influence over the ministry than you will. So as you say, if the ministry has got this perspective, then that's what's going to happen. And putting the ratepayers of the country, I suppose, to the expense of arguing it 67 different times and ended up with the same result doesn't seem sensible.
Well, we're spending $1.4 million on infrastructure and $140,000 a year. It's just a waste of money. That's just a waste.
Graham, have you got a question?
Madam Chair, I just wondered if there's a legal position, if council was to object to this, is there an avenue that we could go down? Can somebody help us out for that?
My understanding, there is going to be legal action, and we're looking for councils to join that.
Do you want to address that? Oh, Mark. Okay. We'll move into deliberation phase. I think, are you happy with us to address that issue in terms of legal advice in our discussions? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions for Kane while we have him in the hot seat? Last one, Marcus.
Sorry, yeah, I would be against joining you with legal action, because I don't think it's up to us to spend ratepayers' money fighting something when it's not, when it should be central government based.
Okay.
Can I just say one last thing?
Absolutely.
You're spending $1.4 million on infrastructure and $140,000 a year. It's not even going to fix a problem, and it's going to lower our children's IQ. I don't know if that's not worth spending money on legal bills for. I don't know what is.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other question for Kane before I let him vacate his seat? No other questions. Look, thank you very much, Kane. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the support you've been given. So we'll just move then to a recommendation we have to move into a deliberation phase on the verbal and the written submissions we've received in respect of the water supply bylaw. It's appearing at recommendation 3C on page 15 of our agenda. Could somebody move that for me? Claire is happy to move, and Graham will second. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So I open up the floor then for deliberations. I wonder if perhaps a good place to start was Graham's question. Diana, are you able to address Councillor Webber's request around issues around legal advice?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a criminal offence for the council not to comply with the Director General of Health's direction relating to fluoridation. It's also not within council's powers to decide not to fluoridate if we've been given a direction by the Director General of Health.
Thank you. Just for the purposes of letting the people who might be watching online and obviously our guests today, Diana is our in-house legal counsel, just to give you some perspective in terms of her expertise. So are you comfortable with that, Graham? So, Mike.
Yeah, through the chair, what's our time frame again to have to deliver this? What's the maximum time frame?
In respect of what, Mike?
In terms of having to put the infrastructure in and then start the fluoridization of Cambridge at least.
That's Martin Mould. Now, Mr. Mould is in charge of our water services in Waipa.
For the chair, councillors, yep. So once we've been, the funds has come from the Ministry of Health, we'll then have 9 months to implement the fluoridation. We haven't had the funding agreement yet from them.
Okay. Okay. Mike?
Yeah, just to remind me again, iwi's involvement in this, Mana Whenua involvement in this process. That's just a question, what is it? How do we have to consult?
There is no consultation required.
So it does seem...
Can I just interrupt for a minute there, Mike? Are you asking in respect of the fluoridation issue or in respect of the water supply bylaw as we're currently dealing with it under review?
No, it is around the fluoridization.
Okay, because I was going to say we have consulted in respect of the bylaw in its totality. Okay. Yeah, great.
Madam Chair, Martin, so is the Ministry of Health fronting up with the capital cost to get the stuff installed, and then we take on the ongoing costs to run the whole thing? Is that, am I right there?
So we're expecting the funding agreement to come within the next few weeks. We're expecting they will pay the capital cost. I'm unsure about how much they will fund the ongoing operational cost.
Certainly the costs, the estimated costs seem rather on the high side. I'll leave it at that. Any other points of deliberation people would like to raise in respect of the submissions we have? Mike?
Tell me if I'm out of order here, but when I go to Dunedin and you go to the old Speight's brewery there, there's pure water that comes out of a tap, and many places around the country you can do that. If this takes place, which it looks like it has to, are we in a position to be able to offer any non-fluoridated water in terms of go fill up a bottle type thing? Is that something we could be looking at? Just asking.
My understanding, so I'm not 100% sure, is that once we've been directed to fluoridate or drinking water, we won't be able to provide a non-fluoridated supply.
Thanks, Martin. Marcus?
How does that work in Hamilton then, Martin? Because don't they provide the tap at Quadlands and at the Arboretum?
Yeah, they weren't directed by the Ministry of Health to fluoridate. They chose to do it. But elected members decided to fluoridate, so it wasn't a directive.
Okay, I see. Roger, I see you've been patiently waiting online there.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's just going further on Mike's question, and Martin, your response said that, well, sorry, my interpretation of your response is that there is no guarantee of the government actually funding the capital installation of the equipment. We've got to apply for it, but it's not automatically given. Or that's what I took from your response.
Yep. So my understanding is there's that the Ministry of Health have enough capital funding to pay for the 14 councils they've instructed to fluoridate. So they will be covering, my expectation is they're covering the cost of the capital installation. What we're unsure of is the ongoing operational cost.
So just your comment there, your expectation. Is there anything in the information that we've been given that says that the government is going to, rather than it being your expectation?
We haven't seen the funding agreement yet, so no, it's only an expectation.
Right, so there's no guarantee we get the capital funding. And what about the ongoing operating costs? Is that again just a comment in a document, or have we any advice from government about covering the operating costs?
No, we're waiting to see the funding agreement from the Ministry of Health.
Right. There's something wrong with this government. Okay. I can appreciate that there's a legal stance, but I just have a problem being told by government that we must do something, and there's absolutely no response to it.
Yes, I dare say that central government probably won't find very many supporters in this room right now. But anyway, thank you, Roger. Have you had any other questions?
No, I haven't. Thank you.
Lou.
Just a quick question, really, is with this fluoridation, they've only chosen 14, I noticed, areas to code. Is that being simply because we were seen as being people that would be soft targets? I just wonder about this a little bit, that we see some larger cities left right out of this. We've had a lot of things against this, and there are cities like Christchurch, for example, that were against even chlorine in the water. So it's just an interesting question whether this is, I just wonder whether this has just been a targeted thing. I would wonder if they're going to implement it, surely they would have implemented it over the whole country or not.
And Martin, do you have any insight into that? Certainly the whole needs-based argument is probably something that sits at the back of most people's mind, but have you any insight into the rationale?
So my understanding is the rationale was based on population served by dollar spent to fluoridate. So the maximum number of people fluoridated for the money they had to spend. So that all councils provided costs to fluoridate all of their schemes, and then they chose which ones to fluoridate from there, and that was based on the number of population and per cost to fluoridate.
So not based around tooth decay numbers
it was
or anything like that?
So they had a multi-criteria analysis, which I haven't seen, that covered all aspects of it, and one of those criteria was the population served.
Okay. But not specifically about tooth decay or dental issues in those specific populations.
That was one of the criteria was that. I don't know how many there were.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Martin. Right. Any other questions?
Sorry.
Roger.
Sorry. Yes, another question has come to mind through you, Madam Chair. Martin, are you aware of any other New Zealand TAs that already fluoridate their 100% water supply?
From memory, I think there's 6 councils that fluoridate in New Zealand. Hamilton is one, and parts of Auckland. Others, Waikato District Council do too. Waikato, yeah.
But you were saying that Hamilton don't 100% fluoridate theirs, so there is an option of non-fluoridated supply in Hamilton. Does the same apply to the Auckland?
Hamilton have got one tap where you can go and fill a bottle of water that's not fluoridated.
Logistically, that must be very unusual. I'd like to find out how regularly that's used. But anyway, Roger, did you have any other questions?
No, I was just trying to find it also if of those territorial authorities that have fluoridated water in New Zealand, has any research been done on those TAs to see if there's any effect?
So that's a question for the Ministry of Health.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you. Thanks, Roger. Thank you, Martin. So I think we've obviously just any other questions around that issue before we turn our mind to the submissions we have in writing before us. Obviously, the first one appears on page 24, which is from the Cambridge Community Board, which was supportive of the draft bylaw. Doesn't raise any questions, issues there, discussion around that submission. And then the Te Mutu Community Board then appears on page 26. They also added a little reference around modernising some of the language, which I believe you've incorporated that alteration, Graham, into the draft bylaw in terms of reference to bathing.
Yes,
really rather
6.3.
Yeah. Excellent. Any discussion around that point in terms of that alteration, or any other matters raised in that submission? And then on that basis, we move then to the written submission from Mr. Titchener, who obviously spoke with us again today, and we've discussed this issue in quite considerable detail. If we've got any other comments or questions or deliberations, discussions around that issue before we turn our mind to the recommendations? No? Okay. So then we return then to our recommendations, which appear, we've referred to those ones. We then have 4 recommendations there. Now, on the basis that, from what I'm hearing from the elected membership, is that there are no amendments necessary as a result of our submissions and deliberations today. So my read of it is therefore that paragraph E should be removed. So that leaves us paragraph D, approving the amendments to the draft Waipa District's water supply bylaw, noting that the draft, and then F, which will be a new E, we note that the draft bylaw meets the requirements of Section 55 of the Local Government Act, and it's the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem, that the bylaw is the most appropriate form of bylaw, and it doesn't give rise to any implications under and is not inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. And then the final recommendation was G, become F, recommends that the District Council adopts the draft Waipa District Water Supply Bylaw for implementation on the 1st of October. So is anybody going to move those 3? Andrew's happy to move them. I will second them from the chair. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attendance today, Mr. Titchener, and thank you for your attendance to the supporters. It's obviously a very emotional and issue for you all. And I'm pleased that you came today and expressed your issues or your concerns about what we've done. Thank you. Right. Right. Can we move on then to the next agenda item, which is appearing on page 54. So this next item is perhaps we just take a slight adjournment while our friends leave the gallery. Thank you. We'll return in 10 minutes.